Okay, well, if you're watching this and you thought that those clips from Mike Johnson and Tom Cotton were scary, I have one more for you. And this is a clip that I don't think got nearly the attention it deserved. I'm curious your thoughts on this. This is back in November 2024, so
Yep.
just over a year ago. This is right after Trump won the election. And that's when the Biden administration announced that they lifted restrictions on Ukraine launching long range ATACMS missiles into Russia. And right after Biden announced that, Russia formalized a new doctrine that said that under its new policy that Russia could carry out nuclear strikes in response to any attack on its territory by a non-nuclear state that is backed by a nuclear armed power. So basically, and it was obvious what Russia was doing, was signaling here, that even though Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons,
Yep.
if Ukraine uses U.S. weapons to launch attacks on Russian territory, then Russia could carry out nuclear strikes in response. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that and how dangerous that Russian policy is. But before we get to that, right after Russia announced this new doctrine, a top U.S. military leader delivered his comments on this. His name is Admiral Thomas Buchanan. He's director for the Plans and Policy Directorate at the U.S. Strategic Command, which manages the U.S. nuclear arsenal. And he said something extraordinary. First he said, quote, "We are ready to prevail in conflict." In a nuclear conflict, he meant. And then he also said this.
We certainly don't want to have an exchange, right? I think everybody would agree if we have to have an exchange, then we want to do it in terms that are most acceptable to the United States. So it's terms that are most acceptable to the United States that puts us in a position to continue to lead the world, right? So we're largely viewed as the world leader. And do we lead the world in an area where we've considered loss? The answer is no, right? And so it would be to a point where we would maintain we'd have to have sufficient capability.
Okay, so that is the admiral who helps oversee the U.S. nuclear arsenal, speaking at a think tank in November 2024. And basically, and what he's saying there is, A, we can prevail. We're ready to prevail in a nuclear exchange with Russia. And B, we want to make sure that in such an exchange that we maintain the world leader. So your response to this statement?
Absolutely insanity. I actually used that quote. I'm glad to see it on video because I had just read the quote previously, and I used it in an article that Peter Kuznick and I wrote for The Nation last December. When Nihon Hidanki, a Japanese organization, had just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And we used the quote to just sort of demonstrate that, the world, sure, the Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were being recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize, but the world hasn't really been listening. And this was one of the examples of talking about winning a nuclear war, which is an absolute insanity. I mean, look, my view is, of course, the U.S. should lead the world. We're this wonderful country that has brought so many people from across the world together in a beautiful continent and with so many natural resources and so on. But we should lead the world in cooperation and peace, and bring people together and use the United Nations as for what it was meant to do, to bring countries together, to negotiate and to cooperate and to find ways to work together. We can compete. I like to say of course we can compete. We can compete on sports fields, and we can compete in music competitions. When I was growing up in Yugoslavia, we watched Eurovision a lot, There are lots of ways to compete. You don't need to compete by having armed conflicts that kill people in the thousands and millions. And you certainly should not be doing something that is literally going to kill billions of people. The nuclear winter scenario that we discuss US and Russia using 1/3 of their current arsenals leads to, it's often quoted as more than 5 billion deaths of starvation within the first 2 years. That's often quoted. It's actually incorrect. The study that where it was estimated at over 5 billion people, the study was done for a worldwide population of 7 billion. We're not going to grow more food. With 8 billion today, it would be more than 6 billion people dying of starvation in just the first 2 years. And that's global. That's not like, oh, it's just going to happen, in the places where the nuclear war actually took place. And so the notion that the US should win a nuclear war is ludicrous. And Reagan and Gorbachev understood this. If Reagan actually was the very unlikely person to make the kind of progress he did make on nuclear disarmament. In 1986, the US and the Soviet Union had nearly, the others had just a few hundred, had 70,000 nuclear warheads. Reagan and Gorbachev came together. Reagan, they actually they stated in a joint statement, nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. This sentence has been used over and over again in all kinds of communications. I mean, for General Buchanan to be saying this is utterly unacceptable and completely it just seems like, does he even understand what he's talking about?
Well, and to me, it's scarier than even Trump or Mike Johnson or
Oh, absolutely,
because he's overseeing the nuclear arsenal. He's responsible for managing, and he believes we can prevail in a nuclear war.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that really is the scariest part. I actually, until I saw that quote, I actually really sort of thought like the generals are the responsible ones. Like they really understand, I would worry more about politicians because I'd worry that the politicians just had no idea what was going on. But this actually shows that maybe the generals don't know what they're talking about either. And it's very scary.
Very quickly, going back to Russia's doctrine. So Russia changed its doctrine in response to the U.S. giving Ukraine more leeway to attack Russia with U.S. weapons. So Russia changed its doctrine, saying that, okay, if you're backed by a nuclear armed state, even if you don't have nuclear weapons yourself, we can launch nuclear strikes in response. What are your thoughts on that? And how much more dangerous has the world become? Whatever you think of the Ukraine proxy war, who's at fault, whatever the grievances are, how much more dangerous, just in terms of nuclear proliferation and instability, has this proxy war in Ukraine made the world?
So much more dangerous. I mean, the point here is not even necessarily when you have this prospect of a nuclear war happening in a matter of minutes, right? The problem isn't even maybe necessarily that someone will decide, I'm going to decide and I'm going to, send missiles to Russia, or Russia's going to decide to send missiles to the US. The problem is if you think you're under attack, if you have this, the longer this war goes on, I mean, yes, President Trump and President Putin at the very least have at least been in communication, but that still doesn't mean you couldn't have a miscommunication. And if, again, we're talking about, and now like Russia with these hypersonic missiles and things that can reach, targets in Europe in a matter of minutes. I mean, the possibility of someone thinking that they're under attack and launching a nuclear war is absolutely real. And it's all the more dangerous in this kind of a time where, of course, we have the conflict in Ukraine that's and we are talking about the proxy war between the two largest nuclear superpowers. But the Middle East isn't, immune to this either, because Israel does have nuclear weapons and it has 90 nuclear warheads. It's, of course, an unacknowledged arsenal, but it's there. We know it's there. And having a conflict there is not a good thing either. And we don't actually really even know what would transpire if, say, Israel were to use a nuclear warhead. And then India, Pakistan, I mean, we saw that earlier this year. India, Pakistan were quite literally on the verge, of a war that could have gone nuclear.
Yeah.
So India, Pakistan they each have on the order of 150 nuclear warheads, so far less than the US and Russia. If they use them, the estimate is, if they use their entire arsenals in a nuclear war, the estimate is that there would be 130 million deaths from the explosions, just like in the moment of, the explosions. And the estimate for nuclear winter is, as I was explaining earlier, 5, but really 6 billion. This is 2, but really 3 billion people. That's just India, Pakistan. That's nobody else doing absolutely anything. I mean, and so when that conflict was happening, there were comments by people like, let them do whatever they want. It's actually not, that's not what this is. These weapons are different. This would have the kind of global consequences that you quite simply, nothing else really matches it. The only things that could cause such sort of widespread devastation would be like an asteroid impact or a super volcano, and those are not happening anytime soon. Like, they're not happening in your and my lifetime. They're not going to happen in the lifetimes of children alive today. They're probably not going to happen for thousands of years. Like, it's a problem for some other time. This is a problem today.